My name is Wren, I am 28 years old, and the most painful thing I have ever done is stay quiet long enough to let my own family destroy themselves. They stood at my parents' dining room table in North York, laughed in my face, and called my wedding venue a budget fishing camp. They told me my fiancé, Cole, the man they dismissed as a hobbyist coder with no real career, was not good enough for me, not good enough for our family, not good enough to fill the chair beside me at Christmas dinner. What they did not know was that Cole was 48 hours away from taking his clean energy technology company public on the Toronto Stock Exchange at a valuation of $4.2 billion. What they did not know was that my sister's fiancé, the Bay Street darling they treated like visiting royalty, was already under active investigation by the RCMP's Financial Crimes Unit for defrauding his own clients out of millions of dollars. My sister's luxury engagement gala at a Whistler ski resort fell apart in spectacular and very public fashion. Her fiancé was arrested on a mountain dock with every major news outlet watching. My family was stranded in British Columbia with frozen credit cards, no hotel access, and no one to call. And when my mother finally borrowed a stranger's phone and sent me a message begging to be let in, I sent her back exactly 2 words: too late. I grew up in a house in North York where keeping up appearances was treated like a second religion. My parents worked hard, genuinely hard, and I have always respected that. But somewhere along the way, hard work got replaced by performance. The house had to look right, the neighborhood had to look right, the children had to look right. That pressure landed almost entirely on me because my younger sister had been exempt from scrutiny since before she could walk. She was 3 years younger, effortlessly charming in the particular way that some people simply are, and my parents had decided very early on that she was the one the family would point to. I was the backup story, the one that was doing fine, apparently, without anyone needing to look too closely. Cole came into my life when I was 25. He was quiet in a way I first mistook for shyness and later understood was focus. He wore plain clothes, drove a modest car, and when my mother asked what he did for work at their first meeting, he said software. Not software engineering at a rapidly growing company. Not technology development, just software. She nodded and immediately turned to ask my sister's boyfriend at the time about mutual fund recommendations. Cole watched the whole exchange without changing his expression and squeezed my hand under the table. That was when I understood he already knew exactly what kind of family he was walking into. The Sunday dinner that changed everything happened in late September. My mother had made roast chicken, and the good dishes were on the table, which in our house always meant she was trying to impress someone. My sister had brought her new fiancé, Landon. And from the moment he came through the front door, my parents treated him like a guest of honor. He worked at a wealth management firm in the financial district, had the kind of aggressive confidence that comes from being told too often that you are exceptional, and made a habit of referencing his clients without naming them. My father refilled his glass before it was half empty. My mother laughed at his observations even when they were not particularly clever. Cole and I sat across the table and ate our chicken. We had come to announce our wedding date. I had spent months on it. I passed around the envelopes. Cream paper, a simple design, hand-addressed, and explained that we wanted something intimate. The ceremony would be on Cole's family property up north, on a private island on Lake Muskoka. I loved Muskoka. There was something honest about it, something that felt like the real version of this country instead of the performance of it. Close family and friends, no hotel ballroom, no event coordinator with a clipboard and a preferred vendor list. Just people we actually cared about, in a place that meant something to us. What followed was silence. My mother picked up the invitation and turned it over in her hands like she was looking for a catch. My sister set hers face down on the table without reading it. Landon did not pick his up at all. My sister said she had news of her own. She reached into her bag and produced a glossy brochure, a ski resort in Whistler, British Columbia. She and Landon had reserved the private event space for their engagement gala. 3 nights at a 4-star property. Catered dinner, open bar, professional photographer, the works. And she looked directly at me and said the booking was the first weekend in November, the same weekend as my wedding. I asked her why. Calmly, I asked whether she had known. She said the resort only had availability on that particular weekend, and she was not going to rebook a venue she loved, just because I had decided to get married on a dock in cottage country. My mother set down her fork and said I would need to move my date. Not suggested it, said it. As though the decision had already been made and this was simply the announcement. My father said that Landon had put down a non-refundable deposit of $60,000 and that a dock ceremony in Muskoka in November did not carry the same logistical weight. He looked at Cole and said, "No offense, but they were not going to cancel a long weekend in Whistler to stand around outside in the cold." He said it directly to Cole's face. Cole did not react. He sat there, relaxed and unhurried, watching my father with the same expression he probably used when someone was pitching him a bad idea. I have thought about that look many times since. It was not cold, it was simply accurate. My mother turned to Cole and said she understood the tech industry could be unpredictable for independent contractors, and that not everyone could offer Landon's level of stability, but that family occasions were important and required proper planning. She said she hoped Cole understood that she was only trying to help. She was not trying to help. Landon reached into his jacket and pulled out a personal check. He slid it across the table toward my plate. $3,000. He said to use it toward a proper reception hall somewhere. Call it an early wedding gift. My sister smiled like he had performed a public service. I pushed the check back across the table with one finger. I told Landon I appreciated the gesture, but that we were managing perfectly well on our own. And then, because I am a chartered professional accountant who has spent 4 years working in financial compliance, and I had been paying very close attention to certain patterns in the wealth management sector, I mentioned that I had recently come across some interesting discrepancies in how certain client accounts were being managed at some Bay Street firms. The kind of thing that tends to attract attention from the Ontario Securities Commission. I said I imagined he stayed well clear of that sort of risk given his position. The color left his face. He picked the check back up and put it in his pocket without another word. My father demanded I apologize. My mother said I was being jealous and deliberately difficult, the same way I had always been difficult where my sister was concerned. My sister looked at Landon with an expression that was half confusion and half something that looked a great deal like fear. I stood up, thanked my mother for dinner, and told them my wedding date was not changing. I said they were welcome to spend that weekend in Whistler. I picked up my jacket and my bag and walked to the front door. Cole was already beside me, his hand at my back. We did not rush, we did not raise our voices. We walked out into the cool September night and pulled the door closed behind us. By 7 the next morning, my sister had posted a long statement to Instagram, a photograph of herself sitting at her kitchen table, head bowed, looking like she had been crying. The caption explained that her own sister had attacked her fiancé's professional reputation out of jealousy, had made a scene in front of the family, and had thrown a generous financial offer back in their faces out of pure spite. She said she was praying for my healing. She ended it by saying that some people simply could not be happy for others, and that was a burden they would have to carry on their own. The comment section filled within the hour. Aunts, cousins, an uncle I had not spoken to in years, all of them in complete agreement that I had humiliated Landon, embarrassed the family, and was clearly struggling to accept that my sister had done better than me. My phone produced a steady stream of private messages, saying the same thing in slightly different wording. I opened my laptop and created a folder. I took screenshots of every post, every comment, every direct message. I am a compliance professional. I understand the value of documentation. My father called 3 days later. He said he and my mother had made a final decision about the wedding and he was calling as a courtesy. He also said he needed me to bring over my grandmother's brooch, the one she had left to me specifically in her will, the one she had pressed into my hands at the hospital during her last week, and said was mine. For a day that was entirely mine, because my sister wanted to wear it for the Whistler photographs. He said my grandmother would have wanted the family to make good use of it. My grandmother had watched my mother hand everything of value to my sister for 30 years. She had put that brooch into her will, because she wanted one single thing to be beyond dispute. I told my father I understood. I told him I would get it to my sister personally. He sounded satisfied. He said he was glad I was being sensible for once. The following afternoon I texted my sister and suggested we meet at a café in Yorkville. I said I would bring the jewelry box. She told me to make it quick because she had a fitting at 4. She arrived 17 minutes late, carrying 2 shopping bags and wearing sunglasses inside. She sat across from me, crossed her arms, and looked at the faded velvet box sitting on the marble table between us as though it already belonged to her. She opened it. Inside was a single folded document, the notarized certificate of ownership from my grandmother's estate. My name, the executor's signature, filed with the province of Ontario. No brooch. She pushed her finger into the lining. She looked up at me. Her expression moved through confusion and landed on the edge of something uglier. I raised my left hand and rested my chin lightly on my fingers. The brooch, a vintage oval sapphire with a ring of seed pearls, the kind of piece that does not call attention to itself but rewards a second look, had been carefully removed from its original mounting by a jeweler in the distillery district and reset into a slim ring. It sat on my finger in the pale afternoon light coming through the café window, quiet and perfect and entirely mine. My sister stared at it for a long moment. Then she stood up so fast her chair scraped across the concrete floor. She demanded I take it off. She said I had destroyed a family heirloom out of spite. She reached across the table toward my hand, and I pulled back, and she caught the edge of her own coffee cup, and it went over the side of the table and hit the floor and sent a wave of cold oat milk across the shoes of the woman sitting behind us. The cafe went completely silent. I stood, picked up my bag, and said I hoped the dress fitting went smoothly. I turned and walked toward the door. Behind me, she was still shouting. The manager was coming around from behind the counter. I stepped out into the November air and let the glass door swing closed. Half a block from the cafe, I heard Landon's voice behind me. He had pulled his car to the curb and stepped out to block the sidewalk. His face was flushed and his jaw was tight. He said I thought I was very clever. He said he had made some calls that afternoon and arranged business-class flights to Whistler for my entire extended family. Hotel covered, everything taken care of, and that by my wedding day I would be standing in front of an empty dock with no one watching. I looked at him and felt something settle quietly into place inside me. I told him that was very generous. I said I hoped everyone had a wonderful time at the resort, and I suggested he keep his phone charged that weekend because he was likely going to receive some calls that required his immediate attention. He tried to read my face and got nothing from it. I walked around him and went to my car. Cole was on a call when I got home. He looked up and I gave him a small nod. He already knew where things stood. We had been working in parallel for months. Him on the IPO filing, me on the compliance trail I had been quietly following since the previous spring. Certain client funds redirected. Accounts obscured through numbered holdings in Alberta. A pattern that Landon had clearly believed was well concealed. The Ontario Securities Commission and the RCMP's Integrated Market Enforcement Team had been building their own case. I had simply organized what I knew into a format that made their timeline easier to confirm, and passed it to the right people through the right channels. Everything after that was their work, not mine. Real power is not loud. It sits at a desk, it reads spreadsheets, it does not make announcements at dinner tables. The first Friday of November was cold and perfectly clear, the sky the particular pale blue that only shows up in Ontario at the edge of winter. My wedding morning started before dawn. I was calmer than I expected to be. The island had been prepared for weeks without anyone from my family knowing what it actually was. Cole's family had owned it for 3 generations, 240 acres on the Muskoka River, accessible only by water or by air. A main lodge that had been in the family long enough to feel like it belonged to the land. 6 additional cabins, a boathouse, a private dock. A property that had been valued most recently at just over $19 million. My family had heard the words private island and imagined a sad little rock with a propane barbecue and folding chairs. At 9 in the morning, Cole's CFO sent him 2 lines. They had opened at $63 per share. The valuation had cleared $4.2 billion. Cole showed me the message, put his phone in his jacket pocket, and asked if I was ready to get in the canoe. He is not a man who needs to make a speech out of every good thing that happens to him. That was one of the first things I loved about him. 430 miles west, at a ski resort in Whistler that had been processing Landon's credit cards since 8 in the morning with consistent results, things were going differently. The resort's event coordinator had explained, patiently at first and then in shorter sentences, that the balance owing on the private event space had to be settled before the room would be released. 3 cards had been declined. A 4th came back with a message the coordinator read out in the flat professional tone of someone who has seen this before. Account frozen. Contact your financial institution. The hotel room block, booked under a corporate card, had been suspended at 6:42 that morning as part of a coordinated asset seizure by FinTrack and the RCMP. The timing was precise and deliberate. Landon's firm had been aggressively short-selling Cole's company through obscured holdings, betting the IPO would fail, using client funds to do it. When the stock opened at 63, every one of those positions collapsed simultaneously. The margin calls came in faster than any system could absorb. The RCMP had been waiting outside the resort since before sunrise. My family was in the lobby. They had flown in on flights booked with a corporate card that was now canceled. They had checked into rooms under a reservation that was now void. They were sitting with their luggage in the middle of a ski resort on a Saturday morning, looking at their phones. The CBC broke the story at 9:40. Bay Street fraud. RCMP arrest at a Whistler resort. Millions in client funds redirected through numbered holdings. They ran helicopter footage from above the resort and then cut to file footage of Bay Street while the anchor read the details. My relatives looked at each other and then at their screens and then at Landon, who was not in the lobby anymore. He had been outside trying to make a call. The RCMP found him there. Back on the island, Cole and I said our vows in front of 200 people who had earned a place in our lives. A federal court judge, a longtime colleague of Cole's from his early startup years, officiated. Cole did not wear anything that tried too hard. I wore a dress that fit the way a good thing fits, simply and without effort. We said what we meant. There was wine from a Niagara winery and someone had managed to find fresh branches of late bittersweet, and the whole lodge smelled like pine and wood smoke and something I could not name, something that felt like the word finally. After the ceremony, we walked down to the dock. A restored de Havilland Beaver floatplane sat on the water, dark green, repainted, the kind of aircraft that belongs to this part of the country. Cole had arranged it months ago. The pilot stood at the door. Before I stepped in, my phone vibrated. A text from my sister's number, but I recognized my mother's sentence structure immediately. She had borrowed my sister's phone, likely because hers was no longer working. It read, "Wren, sweetheart, we are at the resort and everything has gone terribly wrong. Landon has been arrested. We cannot access the rooms. The flights home won't go through. We are so sorry. Is there anything you can do?" I read it once. Not because I needed time to decide. I knew exactly what my response was. I read it once because I wanted to be honest with myself about what I was feeling, and what I was feeling was not anger, not triumph, but something quieter and more final than either of those things. The particular stillness that comes when you realize that people who were supposed to protect you chose not to, and that you survived it regardless, and that their choices no longer carry any weight in the life you are standing inside. I typed 2 words. Too late. I pressed send, then blocked her number, my sister's number, and every relative who had sent me something cruel in the weeks leading up to that day, one by one. It took less than 4 minutes. I put my phone in my coat pocket. Cole offered me his hand. I took it. We walked down the dock and got on the plane. As we lifted off the water and banked north over the lake, I put my face close to the cold window and watched the island get smaller below us. The birch trees along the shore were the last to hold their color. The dock looked very small and very still from up here, and everything beyond it was open sky. If you are listening to this story and you are somewhere in the middle of a situation that feels impossible, a family that keeps rewriting history, a sibling who takes and takes and takes, parents who have decided that your worth is measured by how quietly you accommodate everyone else's comfort, I want to tell you something I had to learn the hard way. You cannot earn your way into being seen by people who have decided not to see you. The problem is not your performance. The problem is their perception, and that is not yours to fix. Setting a boundary with the people who raised you is the hardest thing most of us will ever do. Every instinct in your body works against it. Society works against it, but walking away from a situation that is designed to diminish you is not cruelty. It is not bitterness. It is the quiet, necessary act of deciding that your life belongs to you, and not to whoever can shout the loudest about what you owe them. My family thought they were putting me in my place. They forgot that you cannot keep someone in a room they have already outgrown. I found a partner who saw me before I had to prove anything. I built something solid and true while they were busy betting everything on a man made entirely of borrowed confidence and other people's money. And when they reached out, not with love, not with genuine remorse, but with that particular hunger that appears only after the illusion has collapsed and the money is gone. I was already in the air and the lake was already far below me, and I was the freest I had ever been in my life. If this story meant something to you, I would love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me about a time you finally stopped explaining yourself to someone who had already decided not to listen. Drop a like if you know what it feels like to outgrow the room you were raised in. And subscribe to Jumpy Revenge. There are more stories coming, and every single one of them is about people who chose themselves when no one else would. Your peace is not something you negotiate, it belongs to you. Start acting like it.